Okay.
Underserved and overserved.
Right. Good morning. It's Thursday, February 10th, 10:31 a.m. This is the second half of Senate Natural Resources and Energy Morning Meeting. We've been reviewing S-148, the next draft, with a variety of witnesses. And now we're beginning our tour of talking with operating areas in government, since although ANR is the lead agency on developing the rulemaking around it. We're anticipating an interagency, just as we have ICAR, there'll be sort of an interagency committee that relates to environmental justice, because the work flows into the operations of all parts of government. There are a number of agencies all named in, and we're starting our visit with operating areas today. And would like to just spend a little time with each of you and hear, I don't know to what degree you've reviewed S-148, thought about, it is a work in progress, so I know it's a little bit hard to assess precisely what it would mean to you, but knowing the overall shape of it now, and knowing that it's evolving in committee, although I think the end form will be similar to what we started with. I'd like to ask you if you've assessed how you'll implement environmental justice principles or guidance in your operating areas. And then one other quick note, like any bill that's going to have a cost of implementation, I've reached out to the Joint Fiscal Office, and so you all should be hearing directly from JFO probably next week, maybe the end of this week. Well, today's already Thursday. Soon, let's just say soon, and to work through an estimate of cost of implementation, as well as if there are funds that you already receive that would help support you in that work, then if you could help JFO understand that as well, that would be helpful, because it may not be an entirely new appropriation, through general fund. It could be that you have operating funds that would appropriately be targeted to this work. So with that little preamble, we have a number of folks here with us from the Agency of Transportation. Ms. Boomhauer, you're our usual point person, so we're happy to hear from you and your colleague. However you want to use the time, we're here to listen. Thanks.
Thank you, Senator Bray. We appreciate the opportunity to come before the committee and talk about the work in the arena of environmental justice that the Agency of Transportation has been engaged with for a very long time, and honing and always learning and improving the ways that we can advance this work. I do have a presentation, and I will share that on my screen and get the PowerPoint running. Okay, are we seeing the PowerPoint in their presentation mode?
There we go. Looks perfect. Okay. Thank you.
Perfect. Now, the tricky part is, oops, how do I see my notes at the same time? My apologies.
No problem.
Okay, here we go. So I believe I've got my notes and you're seeing the screen.
Yes.
Perfect. Okay. So as I mentioned, we've worked in this arena for a long time. I'm here with Lori Valburn, who is our Civil Rights Program Director. And, we've been very much in touch of watching this legislation, coordinating with the Agency of Natural Resources as it relates to programming, which we've been doing for a while. And as I said, this is an area where we have been a leader in state government amongst state agencies. We have many initiatives that address equity, and certainly that's in large part due to the federal funding that we receive and our federal partnerships. who are very much focused in this area. And we also, as an agency, value diversity and look to engage and support those who have been historically underrepresented in the transportation access area and in decision making, as well as underserved by our programs. So this slide just gives you an example of our programmatic efforts. We, have recognized, I think one of the key components of your bill was talking about the lack of adequate transportation as a major barrier to healthcare access, as an example. And the agency piloted a program called Rides to Wellness in cooperation with hospital networks. And there was unfortunately not much uptake on using these funds or in getting folks to be attracted to take advantage of this. The pilot was run based on a pilot run by the Springfield Medical Center Medical Care System through the Springfield Hospital, which they had a really successful opportunity. And so in evaluating the successes of that program and identifying the challenges related to how we could perhaps deliver the service differently, we continue to recognize the opportunities for understanding these very complex issues and how we have a lot to learn always in terms of delivering these services. That's just sort of a snapshot of an example. But you'll see here, since 2017, we had integrated guidance into our public engagement document, which has basically a mapping component for identification of underserved and underrepresented communities, and a checklist that project managers and program managers use relative to preparing to engage the public and making sure that we are bringing the appropriate resources, talking with the appropriate people, providing interpretive services as needed. The next Title VI program notation, we do a lot of work in the area of limited English proficiency. The Department of Motor Vehicles in their equitable access has most recently allowed for translators to accompany people taking a driver's test, so that if they are not primary English speakers, that they can still undertake the test successfully. I mentioned the healthcare access and public transit, and we also work closely in employment diversity for highway construction, trying to attract a wide array of folks to our programming. Federally disadvantaged business, enterprise, and small business programs are a core part of Lori's mission in terms of bringing folks and availing them of the federal funding that we have, and assuring that contractors and subrecipients adhere to these principles in terms of their workforce and engagement with the beneficiaries of our investments. The Vermont VTrans Training Center does extensive work on employee training in equity, diversity, and inclusion. And those were really, we established a baseline requirement for all employees a few years ago, and now the new employee orientation has those elements built into it. And then most recently, and I'll talk about this more, we are advancing a transportation equity framework and equity factors in our prioritization process. Please chime in if there is anything that you want to ask me as I go along. I just can't see hands.
I do have one question.
Yes.
The very first item on your list where you were talking about using a mapping for engagement. And so, and you referenced overburdened and underserved communities. I'm just wondering if that mapping tool is something you've shared with ANR, because what we mean by those terms is subject, the subject of quite a bit of conversation right now, and we're trying to get to common definitions. So I don't want to stop your presentation, go into detail on it, but this is ANR. Have you shared that with ANR so they know what you have and how you define it?
Yeah, so currently we are using census data, and we have shared that framework, and we're also working towards understanding what the most current mapping resources we should be using are, and looking at the mapping tool that was developed by the UVM team. And there are some federal mapping tools for transportation that have been released by our federal funders. And, I think this speaks to the complexity that I would talk about in this slide, which is, and you've mentioned it in your conversations, sort of, we have a variety of federal agencies who are now promulgating different requirements. And Justice 40, sort of is an umbrella, but each federal agency in some regards has their own spin on the requirements and what areas of our investments those requirements are going to apply to. And so I think this will be something we will be very interested to better understand and to comment on as we move through this process, because we would hope to have a framework whereby we're not having to run two sets of efforts, as it were, to meet federal requirements and to meet state requirements. So just that's sort of a side note on that.
Okay, thank you.
So in terms of Justice 40, as I mentioned, it would require the agency, other parts of state government, depending on their funding streams, to make specific investments. And that guidance is obviously still very much in its infancy. From our understanding, in terms of the interim guidance, in terms of the transportation sector, we have overall about a $630 million annual budget. About a little more than half of that comes from the federal government, and they have, that there are some programs that are identified for example, transit, microtransit, walking and biking investments, that sort of thing, that are clearly apparent in the Justice 40 framework for the transportation investments. And then we have other programs such as investing in highways and bridges and that sort of thing that have federal performance measures that we have to meet in terms of assuring that we're keeping the system in a state of good repair. And so how will these targets of percent investment under these programs, state and federal, balance with some of the other performance objectives that are already layered into these systems? So something we're still learning about. At the state level, last year in the transportation bill, the agency committed to working on a transportation equity framework. And this was a concept we brought forward to the committee for inclusion in the transportation bill, recognizing that we wanted to basically take our work to the next level in terms of understanding how we can do better with our engagement, how we can better prepare underserved and underrepresented communities to participate in the various opportunities for providing input relative to investments in transportation projects or programs that would serve them or affect them in a particular area. And so working with the 11 regional planning commissions around the state, we have embarked upon this work, which is just commencing now and will be ongoing for the next year, to answer some of these questions and advance some of these efforts in terms of how we will assure that we are using the correct tools, that we are forming the correct relationships, and we are making decisions in an equitable manner with the input that's needed to be able to understand what that needs to look like. Basically our equity framework is going to be creating a vision, goals, objectives, and actions that will be the context for this effort. And we'll be framing the goals on inclusive engagement, equitable investment in action, and equitable outcomes. And you can see from this matrix that, this overlays to in so many areas for us in our planning processes, in our prioritization processes, which basically drive what is included in our capital investment program. And so how are we analyzing equity and applying a score to a prioritization of a project? Similar to other scores, we have factors for health, we have factors for the economy, we have factors for asset condition. Obviously, that's a major one. They're not all equal, but they're all elements that go into this that as the prioritization happens at the regional level with input through the transportation advisory committees of the regional planning commissions, we then understand how to make our first, second, and third investments. And so how will we overlay this as well? So as I mentioned, this project is just kicking off. We're working with Resource Systems Group out of Burlington, as well as the Democracy and Just, sorry, I've got the acronym out of my mind, but they have a subcontractor. Kaya Morrison is, Morris is the subcontract lead, and we've identified a variety of stakeholder target groups, the second generation New Americans in the Burlington-Winooski area, rural elders who are, may not necessarily be engaged with our work, the BIPOC community in the Bennington area, and then under folks with income challenged folks who may live in either a rural or urban setting. So that's some of the key inputs that we will be looking to gain. So in terms of S148, we're following it very closely. We, as I mentioned, are aware of the need for this and have been working in this area for many years. We are now obviously very closely focused on addressing emissions from the transportation sector, preparing for response and stability to extreme weather, and building resiliency in the transportation system. And so, what does that mean for all of the constituents who will be impacted by these specific areas, and how will we be mitigating and enhancing their day-to-day experience with our investments? We support a statewide coordinated approach to EJ policy and community engagement, with the agencies having the flexibility to incorporate what we learn and know to be true into our procedures and engagement strategies, while still balancing the state requirements with federal requirements, as I mentioned, both, I think, of which are in many ways still in their infancy as it relates to this level of work in equity. So understanding and tracking cumulative burdens is going to take time and a thoughtful process, especially as it pertains to making rules around it. I think that was discussed earlier this morning with Commissioner Walk and and the representatives that were on the call earlier. So we look forward to participating in that process and appreciate this opportunity to be part of this effort. And that's our overview. Lori, I don't know if you have any thing you would like to add before we take questions.
Well, thanks, Michelle, and thank you to all of the center, Senator Brian, and all of you. I think you've covered it all and laid it out great, Michelle, and I'm happy to also field questions, particularly with respect to the foundation that that we've been describing. We've had the advantage within all of state government to have an opportunity and the staffing to be able to make equity considerations a key part of our agency's programming for many, many years, but we certainly see that there's an opportunity now to really take it to the next level. We're excited about being able to use our existing programming and resources to really stretch and make sure that we're doing the best that we can, particularly in the area of community engagement, public participation, so that it can inform our programming to the fullest. So I'm happy to also take any questions about what we're doing and where we hope to go.
I see the chair's talking, but we can't hear him. So I'm going to just jump in quickly and ask if this, so are you all okay with the bill as drafted? Is that the impression I'm getting? No, go ahead.
I would say we are pleased to see the progress that's being made on the bill. And as I mentioned, we're working very closely with A&R on the modifications that are occurring. Yep. And so I would say Commissioner Walk really is taking the lead in that area with the input from us in the background.
That's really helpful. And I'm sorry if I missed that when you gave your presentation. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for that question, Senator Campion. I was actually starting with saying hello to Ms. Valburn and saying, I think this is your first time coming into committee, so thanks for coming in. I have to admit that although we see AOT in our committee every year, I underappreciated the degree to which you're already engaged in work that has this sort of community outreach component to it. So could you just say a little bit about, since you do have this long history of connecting with communities, and I suppose it makes sense because you're physically reaching into communities as you do projects, but can you say a little bit about what the difference is between what you have been doing to date and that sort of taking it to the next level? What is, from your point of view, what's novel about what S148 is asking you to take on?
So I think I can, sorry. I'll start by responding to that because I've been involved for all of my career in either regional planning or state government and working in this area of public engagement. And what I have seen over the years is that, we progressed, the collective, I'll speak to transportation specifically, from, kind of checking the box on the public engagement in terms of, all right, we held a public meeting, we made sure people, knew what the project was. If people were, we would advertise through the newspapers and that sort of thing, and local channels. But I would say it was more of a perfunctory process than maybe a well-engaged, well-informed process that was thoughtful in terms of who we were reaching, who we were potentially impacting, how we might be impacting them, and understanding that they may or may not be aware of the ability to engage, how to engage, have the resources to engage, which is a key part. And so over the years, I think we've become better and better at reaching communities, at finding out who the key contacts are within communities to assure that we're reaching the audiences that we want and need to reach. And then making sure that we're communicating with those audiences in an appropriate manner so that they are able to receive and understand what it is we might be doing and how it might impact them. And that might be from bringing translator services, like a meeting I attended in the north end of Burlington a couple of years ago related to a rail project we were doing. Or in the example of my work before coming to VTrans at the Chittenden County Regional Planning Commission, we were actually bringing members of the community in to give them a transportation 101 and talk about who we are, what we do, how you can be involved in what we do. What do you need in order to be involved? Do you need financial resources to attend the meetings? Do you need babysitting services? All these sorts of things. And so we've really progressed in terms of those elements. And now we want to sort of take it to the next level in terms of, how well we understand who and how we are impacting communities, and making sure that we are building their resource capacity to engage in our processes while we learn more about their needs and limitations that have occurred because of our investments. And Lori, I'd invite you to add more to that if there's anything to add. There's always more to add.
Well, you've done a great job, Michelle, but I'm happy to just fill in the blanks. So I've served in my capacity now for 24 years. And over that period of time, our engagement with Vermonters has changed dramatically in terms of the scope of it, the technology, and everything else. I think as Michelle indicated, we recognize that even though we thought we were doing a fine job of engaging all of the various constituents around the states and making sure that we provided an opportunity for input from all different populations, we probably weren't hitting the mark as much as we thought that we were. And part of this is a growing awareness of how important the ways in which the work that we do, all of the services and benefits that we're bringing to the table, all of our actions, whether it's prioritizing projects, whether it's everything that we're doing to try to make sure that we're not leaving any groups out of the conversation. I think that S148 gives us not only the impetus, but the opportunity to really, really step up the conversation. And that's part of what this equity framework project that we've undertaken is going to help with. So at our agency, for many years, we have gone through federally mandated processes to try to make sure that we connected with various so-called protected classes. Those are federally defined in a number of different laws, whether it's Title VI, whether it's the ADA, various regulations from some of our federal funding partners at USDOT. But in doing so, Vermont, I'm proud to say, has always looked at those requirements that are set in federal laws and executive orders as being not the ultimate, but setting a floor. And Vermont has always required us to expand how we define those vulnerable populations and those protected classes. At the Agency of Transportation, we've never seen it as a check the box. We have seen it as the opportunity to be able to serve people in their communities in the way that's going to be meaningful. And so we've been having an internal conversation lately about how we define vulnerable communities and vulnerable populations, and making sure that we don't leave anybody out of it. And how we've been reaching them over the years has to some extent been effective, where we've been making the best possible use of technology, even pre-pandemic, and that includes figuring out where we can connect with people. So social media is one example of that. And we've had very effective social media campaigns to make sure that we're reaching all communities, including non-native English speakers, to make sure that they know this has been an effort on the part of our DMV for a long time now. As we become aware of new technology, we're trying to make the best possible use of it. So the Ubi Duo machines that have been installed at all of our different DMV branch offices to allow the deaf and hard of hearing to be able to communicate at the counter with the employees is a great example of that. I think that at this point, what we're hoping is that we're going to be able to continue to not just identify the communities and do effective outreach, but really make sure that we're hearing them, that we're giving them a voice in all of our planning and decision-making and policies, so that what the work that we're doing is going to benefit as many possible folks as we can. And that requires building relationships of trust. And it's something that I know that all government aspires to, but it takes time. And we're trying to take into account, we're trying to own responsibility for all of the obligations that we have, but also make good use of the opportunities. The funding that's coming into the state of Vermont right now, and particularly some of the transportation funding, comes with tremendous opportunities. But we also recognize that we have obligations, and we're grateful to the legislature to try to help us define how we go about spending that money in a very, very responsible, accountable way. So hopefully we're going to, as a result of the Equity Framework Project, build a model that's going to be useful for all of state government. And we're certainly collaborating closely with the Agency of Natural Resources and other state agencies and departments so that we can speak in one voice, particularly as we tackle the challenges that are across the enterprise.
Okay, well, great. Well, Senator McDonald.
We've been dealing with this issue earlier this morning, and in the bill, it defines the groups as underserved and overburdened. In your work in dealing with vulnerable populations and protected classes, I think was the words that you used, what percentage of Vermonters, thumbnail, would you say fall into the category of vulnerable populations and protected classes when you are acting on behalf of the Agency of Transportation?
I'm going to defer to Lori on this one.
Well, thank you. So I think that we have, we're making good use of the latest Census Bureau data, which is being analyzed and released even as we speak. I know that Susanna Davis, our Director of Racial Equity, has recently released her report to the legislature and has included in there some of the trend lines that we're seeing with the latest Census Bureau data with respect to the Black, Indigenous, and other people of color communities. In general, that number has continued to go up considerably, but we're still the second whitest state in the country. And I think that the percentage of people who self-identify as BIPOC still hovers around 6 or 7%. That's one of the populations that we're highly interested in making sure has a voice at the table and is engaged in our process. Other communities that fall into the either protected classes under federal definitions, it depends upon how we're measuring that. So for some of the work that our agency does, particularly in the area of highway construction, we've got gender as a basis for determining groups that are underrepresented and underutilized. One of the affirmative action programs that the federal government has required in our spending of highway construction dollars for several decades now is the program that tries to provide an opportunity for women and people of color to enter and advance in the highway construction industry. So if we're looking at gender as one of those populations, then I think we're looking at almost 50% or more than 50, just over 50% of the population. The percentage of folks that we serve that identify as being disabled, it's a very, very tough number to pin down because it's a constantly changing one. Unlike some other markers, when it comes to disabilities, we're all kind of on a spectrum. And so the people that need for transportation to be accommodating any types of disabilities, it's constantly varying, but it's been pegged at as much as 20% of the population. I think that all of us can relate to this because some of us have at times at least been temporarily disabled, and many of us as we age become in need of a variety of accommodations, and transportation has been trying to respond to meet all of that. That's true of public transportation, but even in the ways in which we are constructing our projects and are providing for ADA compliance at all of our sites and our facilities. So it's a little bit difficult, Senator, to give you an exact percentage on some of these vulnerable populations, but happy to try to get you some additional information. Some of the other populations that we've identified do include non-native English speakers. So we work very closely with New Americans and the organizations that are helping to support them. And we are very committed to translation services, but also taking down barriers to their ability to obtain a driver's license or to enter the workforce. We have other populations that we're working with on a regular basis to try to identify what their specific needs are as it relates to transportation. Those include folks that are currently homeless or unsheltered. It includes folks that are justice involved. In some cases, they are recently released or they're still in the custody of corrections, and they've identified transit needs as well. I think that the elderly and disabled is a key area that our public transit section has been highly focused on and works closely with. So I'm not sure if that's as complete an answer as you're looking for, but I would say that in general, we have in Vermont a large number of individuals that would fit into common definitions of vulnerable populations, and in some cases, the intersection of several different categories.
Mr. Chair, we're dealing with a bill that seems to be defining people as overburdened and underserved. And to the extent that the Transportation Department deals with policies dealing with people that are overburdened and underserved, I look at that population as going well beyond racial and ethnic issues, education level. So I don't understand, and I understand that it's clear that the witnesses have taken a great deal of sensitivity training and understand the vocabulary and ins and outs of this. I will make my 2 cents in pitch and then I will listen. But the people that I represent are underserved and overburdened. They live in rural areas, they drive on dirt roads, and they buy predominantly used cars. The transportation agency has not been aggressive, has not been pushy on trying to see that more of the new cars sold in this state get and use less gasoline. And I am disappointed that this underserved and overburdened community can't get support from the Transportation Committee to promote and subsidize and put their $650 million worth of transportation funds towards getting a more economic package of automobiles on the used car market. And at the same time, I'm disappointed that we can't get EV owners who are underburdened and overserved, that we can't get that group to contribute to the maintenance of our highways because the Transportation Department opposes that. So we're the Environmental Committee, not the Judiciary Committee, and we're trying to reduce carbon in this world, and we're not succeeding, and the overburdened and underserved are the ones that are paying the price for our not reducing carbon. And Mr. Chair, if I was trying to said I had two sentences, if I spread asphalt in the same way that I spread sentences, we would continue to have dirt roads in the back country. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, please.
I would just like to perhaps respond to a couple of Senator McDonald's observations. And it also sort of occurs to me that there might be the opportunity for the agency to do a presentation for this committee regarding the variety of electric vehicle incentive programs that we've been operating for the past few years. Our electric vehicle charging station deployment models. We have proposed $10 million, actually $12 million for
Mr. Chair, I greatly, I know what we will hear in such a presentation, and my remarks and observations were about the automobiles that burn fossil fuels and will dominate our market for the next decade and a half. And we are doing nothing to deal with that section. And so I'm no disrespect to the witness. I know what we're doing on electric vehicles. The disadvantaged and the underserved aren't driving those vehicles and won't be driving them for a decade and a half. They will continue to be buying more inefficient used gas cars for the next decade and a half. Thank you.
So that's, I'd say, obviously there's a lot more to that conversation to be had.
Yep.
And in terms of S148 and our work this morning, I'm mindful that of the clock, and I would like to thank our VTrans colleagues for coming in and acknowledge what Senator McDonald's alluding to. Basically the challenges with a fleet. What kind of fleet do we have in Vermont? Not the EV fleet or the plug-in hybrid electric fleet, but the gas-powered fleet, and how might we make gains there that would both reduce emissions and reduce costs for Vermonters, and get more of those cars eventually into the used car market and achieve those kind of savings for everyone. With that,
very forward thinking on EVs, no problem.
So thank you again, Ms. Boomhauer and Ms. Valburn. And I'm guessing that ANR appreciates all the work you've done for decades, because you have a lot to share with your colleagues. So thanks again.
Thank you, Senator.
And now to turn to the Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets. Good morning, Secretary Tebbetts. Good morning, Ms. Willard. Good to see you both. It's been a long time, actually, since we've seen each other in this committee. So,
yes, well, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to talk about this talk about this bill. If I may, Mr. Chairman, I've got a brief couple of comments, and then Abby Willard is with me, and Abby has a brief outline of what we've already been doing and what we plan to do in the future in this particular space.
Okay, great.
Great.
Where's yours?
Well, good morning. For the record, Anson Tebbets with the Vermont Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets, also joined by Abby Willard, who leads our Economic Development Division here at the agency. We certainly understand the importance of this topic, and also the importance that we have a state coordinated effort, working with our partners across state government, being the Agency of Transportation, we just heard from, also the Agency of Natural Resources and other departments. We believe it's important to have a thoughtful community engagement plan across state government, and that works best when we're all pulling the cart in the same direction. A couple thoughts. You posed a couple of questions at the beginning of the hearing. As you approach your work, we always think that state government works best when it's clear. There's some flexibility that the public understands, but also state government and our state employees understand the direction of a program. If we get too complicated, sometimes the wheels come off, the public doesn't get involved, and they get discouraged in sort of state employees with programs. So those are just a couple of thoughts as you move forward with your deliberations. Maybe as a little bit of a background, I want to turn to Abby. Over the last year, we've done a lot of work in this particular area, and we have a lot more work to do over the next year. And Abby's going to just run down some of the work that we've been doing recently over the last year. Been working closely with Director Davis and a number of partners, both at the agency, but also in the field. So Abby, maybe you could just outline, if it's okay, Mr. Chairman, a few things that we're doing and we plan to do in the future at the agency, and then we can talk about more parts of the bill as we move forward.
Thank you.
Hi, Chairman Bray and committee members. I'm Abby Willard. I'm the Director of the Development Division at the Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets. Thanks for inviting our agency in today to talk about S148. I wanted to just generally demonstrate a support for the bill's focus on engaging underserved communities and ensuring there's support and new strategies for overburdened communities. Our agency has spent time over the past year, as Secretary Tebbets mentioned, listening and learning to internal issues of inclusion, diversity, equity, and accountability. While we knew this, it's also become increasingly clear and apparent to us that our approach of equality has not been sufficient. We can acknowledge that 2.3% of producers on Vermont farms, for example, identify as Black, Indigenous, or people of color, which compared to the rate across New England is 6% and still well below the national average of 4.8%. We also don't have an equity framework like what AOT shared, but we have focused on our planning efforts to really look at and plan for the future, to take more attention towards support for underserved and overburdened communities. So a few of the priority strategies in the recently released Vermont Agriculture and Food System Strategic Plan identifies priority to improve funding opportunities and equitable access for BIPOC populations, and support more research and data collection on racial equity, for example, in Vermont's food system. We complete the equity impact assessments for the executive branch on all new program opportunities and funding requests, and we will acknowledge that we often lack the data to fully understand the impacts on all Vermont populations to complete those assessments. But we have made efforts to improve marginalized voices' involvement in critical efforts in agriculture, though acknowledging we need to do much, much more. So in efforts that our agency's been involved in through the Vermont Climate Council, through our work with the Payment for Ecosystem Services Working Group, and then most recently on the Future of Vermont Agriculture Commission, each of those planned development efforts intentionally brought diverse voices and perspectives into the conversation. We engage with an organization identified as the Vermont Relief Collective. We are in conversations with Beneke leadership and we do more diverse job recruitment through different platforms like the Vermont Professionals of Color Network. We've worked closely with the migrant farm worker populations to ensure that they have access to COVID testing and healthcare through Bridges to Help and the Open Door Clinic. And we use translation services that are available through state pre-approved contracts for some of our federally funded programs. We also just signed a contract with an organization just outside of Chicago, McKenzie Mack Group. And this is a really exciting next year of endeavors for us to work collaboratively to co-create an action plan for our agency on internal and external engagement and implementation strategies that allow us as an agency to be more inclusive. So we're really looking forward to kind of launching this work with this McKenzie Mack Group for the coming years. Some of the goals that I feel we can confidently connect to around environmental justice policy and procedures include an ongoing commitment that we have to supporting alternative and equitable land access for entrepreneurs to access agricultural land, to increase accessibility to the grants and the technical assistance resources to all Vermonters that we provide through our agency, to expand the knowledge and awareness about the funding opportunities that exist within the Agency of Agriculture, establish programming that specifically supports those that have been left out or left behind, and take more time to capture the perspective from more stakeholders in our program development efforts. So that just gives you a sense, I hope, of efforts we've been engaged in, as well as some of the goals that we have, and acknowledgement of the work that we collectively as an agency have going forward. I think both Secretary Tebbetts and I have some thoughts on S148, but thought we would pause to see if there are questions about what we've done thus far.
Sure. I don't see any committee questions. So, and thank you for all that work. I don't mean to pass right by it, and I want to acknowledge it. I know it's a lot of work and over many years, especially in food access. And during the pandemic, the agency and others have played a critical role on bringing food to more Vermonters. So thank you for that work. On S148, we'd love to hear your thoughts.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think, we come before you wanting to learn more about the bill as well. So we come forward, wanting to be engaged in trying to help you craft a piece of legislation that, works for you and works for us. And a couple of questions that I just have, I think from our perspective, if we were to implement, we want a little more clarity on what the 55% means, the requirement, at the Agency of Agriculture. So that's one thing that I think we need a little more understanding from our perspective, how that might be played out. Some other things that I think would be important is flexible timelines to do the work would be important. We also would probably need a little more understanding of the two councils and how they would work together. Whether they work together or are they separate, how would they advise each other? And the other is public participation. Public engagement is so critical now, and I think we need to have a better understanding for that and how we would engage the public with that. And you mentioned it at the beginning of your remarks about the resources, and I know JFO is going to do an assessment of that. So we always want to keep an eye on that. If we've got some more work to do, we want to make sure that we can do it and we have the resources to do it. So those are just a couple of things. Abby, I don't know if you want to add any more things in your thoughts on what you're thinking about it, but that's kind of where we're at. We want to keep engaged with you and work with our partners at A&R and AOT and all the other agencies on moving this forward, and hopefully can contribute to a positive outcome for you.
So thank you for those comments. And as you know, these are all live areas of discussion in the draft bill. I don't know how much of our conversation this morning either of you caught either.
I didn't. I was in another committee, Mr. Chairman. I was in another committee this morning, so I didn't catch the before the break.
Yep. So, this is really an administration conversation, but I'm trying to be a liaison here. My understanding is that ANR is the lead agency for all the departments and agencies on this one. And I don't know if you've started convening working groups so that ANR is sharing their view of what this bill is, where it's going with all the operating areas, so that puts you in a position to be able to then speak to the bill. And so we're happy to have individual comments, edits from any operating area, of course. And I'm also thinking, though, that it would be helpful to send them through ANR as well, because I think my sense is they're going to be kind of the integrator on behalf of the administration of, even though every operating area has its own domains and different concerns, but I think for the common core, they're serving to come forward with a unified voice. And my understanding is that that process is really just getting, whatever, the pace is getting picked up. Meetings are starting to happen. So
I think that's accurate. We've had a couple of discussions with our sister agencies on this. So we'll keep that ball moving, and we'll make sure that we communicate with them and get the relevant information as well.
Okay, well, great. So it sounds like I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I'm just trying to check in. So far, you're supportive of the construct. You're already doing similar work. And it's just a question of making sure that the bill evolves in such a way that it also works for Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets.
Yeah, I think that's accurate. We want to keep it moving, and we just want to make it a better bill and make sure that we can do the work if we get some direction how would we implement that. But we'll work closely with ANR and our sister agencies on making sure that we have a coordinated effort and direction from our perspective as well.
Okay, great. And on the funding question, so as you mentioned, JFO will be reaching out. The other thing too, I think that will be helpful for JFO is because your income streams better than anybody else. Are there funds that you're aware of that can help support the work, or would we need new appropriations to support some of the work? And what's the blend of sort of repurposing existing income streams to the department versus adding entirely new streams that might be general fund dollars, for instance, so that because in the end, I think I always try to remember to say this to every operating area that we talk to as we talk about enhancing any kind of programming. We never want to ask you to do something for nothing. Like if there's a cost inherent in doing it, as I imagine there always is, we can only basically go to bat for operating areas to the extent that we know what the budgetary implications are. So making that sort of pledge to you. We're not asking you to do anything for nothing here. We'd like to know what it costs, and then we can be supportive.
Thank you. And we'll work closely with JFO to get the data they need to make.
All right. Any committee questions for Secretary Tebbetts or Ms. Willard? All right. So thank you very much. And thank you again. I see Ms. Boomhauer, Ms. Valburn still here. So I think we're going to wrap this part of the morning on S148. Thank you for your help this morning.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Right. So committee, we're going to wrap up early this morning. Who knows exactly how long our meetings would take with witnesses. But so just a reminder that at 4:30, we're going to have that brief training session for the public hearing. Apparently we need to be somewhat precise about how we do it because it's a different version of Zoom. So we'll